So, watching the, I think, pretty now famous footage that CNN shot. I mean, it wasn't shot for use, really, but it was as Jim Acosta was standing there at the Tampa rally, and you see these people who are getting worked up, and they're flashing various signs and yelling various taunts. And then you see the fact that they're wearing the paraphernalia of the heretofore not very well documented by most of us group known as Q or QAnon. I was just looking at all that, and I think I had the reaction a lot of people had, which is it was like looking at a very hot scene where there was some crumpled up newspaper and some greasy rags and some kindling and a book of matches and a can of gasoline, and thinking, wow, I wonder if there's going to be a fire at some point. It almost seems like there could be. Yeah, it really does look like all the elements are there for something much worse to happen than has happened so far. Not to say that what has happened so far, but particularly the status of the press during this campaign, where, I mean, anybody who went out there, I had this experience too, to Trump rallies. I mean, you had the experience of the candidate at the time, in no subtle way at all, whipping the crowd up against the press. And of course, this is escalated. It's escalated into tweets from the president. And now you have these people showing up. And as you'll see today, as we discuss this a little bit more, some pretty concrete, undeniable cases of threats. And I mean, not to discount the fact that we've already had a newsroom invasion and multiple deaths. It's hard to know how much to connect that incident, which seemed very specific unto itself, specific in a way that was probably about that person and his relationship with that particular newspaper. But it's also, I think, impossible to completely extract that person from the conversation we're about to have. There's a dangerous situation right now. And the thing that makes it the most peculiarly dangerous is the fact that the president of the United States is, in many respects, pushing a group of people towards the brink of violence, towards the press. You know, there aren't many professions mentioned in the Constitution. The press enjoys a particular status. It seems as though it is the mission of President Trump to not merely undo that status and discredit that institution and make people less inclined to rely on facts and information provided by those institutions, but really to make something kind of bad happen too. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. So joining us for, I think, the 17th time. That's not true. I was just trying to get the Q people all fired up. 17 times Margaret Sullivan has been on the show, media columnist for the Washington Post. Also joining us is Will Sommer, tech and internet reporter at the Daily Beast. Also writes a newsletter about conservative media. Will, what is the name of the newsletter?
It's a Right Richter.
Right Richter. Okay, I just want to make sure I was reading that correctly. All right. Well, we're going to come to Q in just a second. But Margaret, since you're so good at having kind of an overview of this stuff, I just babbled my way through one of these overviews. But it just seems like there's been this building animosity, and now. And maybe it's the Acosta thing. I can't really put my finger on it, but I feel like we're in a slightly different place, one that feels considerably more ominous than it felt even 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, I think that's true, Colin. And I have certainly heard and read people who've been, journalists who've been at the recent rallies saying that the tone is different now. It feels more hostile. It's ramped up from where it was. And I think some of this is that President Trump is continuing to feel his oats on this issue and to realize that this works for him, that as he that it revs up and fires up his base of supporters to have this sort of common enemy, and the common enemy is mainstream journalists, or as I like to call it, the reality-based press. It works for him to have the press as a foil. And so because of that, I think we're seeing more and more of it, and it's successful from his point of view. But it is, as you say, I think really dangerous. And I am worried about it. The threats that have come to people like Katie Tur Brian Stelter and others just in the past, few days are actually very scary, and they're very violent sounding. Someone told NBC's Katie Tur that she should be, quote, raped and killed. This is vicious stuff, and you could say, well, it's just words, but I think the words could turn to something worse.
Right. And Katie Tur, maybe above almost anybody, is no stranger to this stuff. It goes back all the way back to the earliest stirrings of the campaign. I read her memoir of the campaign. There's a especially strangely, chillingly upsetting moment where there's some guy, she's trying to take a nap in an NBC van, and some guy taps on the window, she rolls down, and he spits into her face at point blank range. And you just realize almost the intimacy of the hatred. And as to the other point that you're making, let's hear this clip. This is from C-SPAN. It's a caller to C-SPAN, and you'll hear the threat to Brian Stelter and to Don Lemon that Margaret just talked about.
Don, State College, Pennsylvania, supports the criticism of the media. Don, you are on the air.
Good morning.
Morning.
It all started when Trump got elected. Brian Stelter and Don Lemon from CNN called Trump supporters all racist. They don't even know us. They don't even know these Americans out here, and they're calling us racist because we voted for Trump. Come on, give me a break. They started the war. I see him, I'm going to shoot him. Bye.
All right. So, I don't know. You work in a lifetime in journalism. You're going to have some of that kind of stuff. Most of us who've done these kinds of jobs have had that. But it does, I don't know, hearing it said that way in a live show always makes it a little bit more chilling. So let's talk about the kind of new X factor, or in this case, Q factor, that has entered this process. Will Sommer, you are getting your PhD in Q these days. I have to say that prior to last week, I knew nothing about this. But it seems as though I should have. It didn't start last week. This whole idea has been around for a while. First of all, how long has this Q conspiracy theory been kind of slopping around on the internet?
Sure. Since October of 2017, when this anonymous Q character started posting clues, but I would say it really started getting going, maybe in the spring, and has really become prominent this summer.
So, and it's a difficult theory or set of theories to summarize. You've been doing your best. It really kind of seems like something out of a Dan Brown novel or something, right? That like just everybody is all the presidents prior to Trump are part of this satanic pedophilic conspiracy.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in QAnon, as you mentioned, and it often sort of just jumps off whatever the current event of the day is. But sort of the thrust of it is that there's this high-ranking member of the Trump administration who is posting these clues on sort of fringy internet message boards, and they posit this world where Trump and the military are engaged in a sort of life or death struggle with all these forces of evil. And so let's say like all these pedophile cults and the Democratic Party and all this, and they believe that eventually there's going to be this moment they call the storm, in which Trump sort of arrests all these people like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and sends them to Guantanamo Bay.
One of the elements, I was making a little joke about it at the beginning there, but I mean, they feel as though they are getting signs and hints from the president that that he is really kind of part of the narrative that they've constructed. They see him as this white knight who is here to drive out all the darkness and evil that's been around. And one of the little hints has to do with 17. He, for example, at one point, because that's what letter of the alphabet Q is. So he at one point says he visited Washington 17 times before he was president. I just happened to be like checking on Google, and there were two pictures of him holding up sports jerseys with the number 17 on. And I thought, oh my God, it's really true. Everything they're saying is true. But I think that's part of it, too. The Internet's a really great place to collect a lot of randomized information, which you can stuff into a narrative if you just pick the stuff that fits the narrative out of this huge pool of information. Yeah,
it's funny you mentioned the jerseys. Those jerseys are often cited by QAnon people as proof. They kind of collect all these the way the internet works, it sort of jams all these different conspiracy theories together, and you can go sort of like looking for clues. There's obviously we saw with Pizzagate, for example, there was a pizza shop and its logo was like a pizza slice, kind of a stylized triangle, and then people said, well, they found a pedophile halfway across the world who had used a similar triangle as a symbol, and they said, well, this is clearly a pedophile thing. And at the same time, you have the internet. I think it really combines these communities, whereas, if one person said, geez, I think this QAnon thing's real, in real life, people might say they're crazy, as we're seeing now, but these people can kind of all coalesce together in a community online.
So, Margaret Sullivan, over the years, it hasn't been that difficult to get people to believe absurd things. We can go back to the moon hoaxes around the turn of the century, where a New York newspaper persuaded people that there was a whole civilization of people living on the moon and had drawings to support it. And people, there was kind of a hysteria about this. I think maybe one of the things that makes this stuff a little scarier is you can get these people together pretty quickly. The internet and Facebook in particular is a really great way for people to find each other. There might only be like 300 people who believe something, but if all 300 of them find each other, you've got a little ball rolling.
That's right. Social media really becomes an engine for this kind of stuff. And I think, the other thing that's happening is, yes, it's happening on the internet in the chat rooms that Will mentioned, 8chan and 4chan and Reddit, but sometimes it kind of emerges out into real life, and that's what happened with this thing that we now call Pizzagate, where an armed gunmen decided to come to this pizza place in Washington, D.C., and actually, shot his gun and said he was there to investigate the Hillary Clinton-related child sex ring. And so, it's one thing if it stays sort of digital only, but when it kind of emerges out into a rally or a pizza joint or who knows where, the streets or a newsroom, then I think we've got some trouble on our hands.
Right. And Will, there's a lot of speculation about where this particular thing came from. There's even speculation today. It may have started as some kind of liberal or leftist hoax trolling conservatives. But it kind of doesn't matter where it came from or what its status was, say, a month ago, right? When somebody turns up armed on the Hoover Dam, when people are turning up at rallies, acting aggressively and wearing QAnon paraphernalia, it's just not a goofy internet thing anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I think the fascinating thing about conspiracy theories is that, there's a lot of weird stuff we can talk about on the internet. But the part when it starts to impact people is, of course, when something happens in real life. And so that's why, we see all the people at the Q rally in the Q shirts at the rallies, and that's what's made this so prominent. It really is. I think people at their peril dismiss the power of these conspiracy theories. I think it's really out of control at this point. A big QAnon thing is they really want Trump to weigh in on it. But I think if Trump came out today and said, folks, this is obviously fake, stop believing in it, that wouldn't do anything, because they would say, well, Trump's just got to say that because he's covering up the real plan. So, it's really off the rails.
Right, and there's a sort of no-win quality to this. Sarah Sanders, I think, was asked point blank about this, and she made a kind of generic dismissal of any groups supporting violence or something like that. And in the Q community, I think they thought, well, she didn't announce us by name. That further entrenches our idea that Trump knows about us and is part of this whole thing. And Will, I'm sort of wondering also, what's it like for you writing about this? Because obviously you're starting to emerge as one of a handful of journalists who really has followed this in some detail. I would imagine that QAnon knows that you exist right now. What does that add up to?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, actually. I've been lucky in terms of I don't really get a lot of threats or anything like that. And most of the QAnon people who reach out to me are actually very polite and sort of say, young man, I think you misunderstand. QAnon is real. They're very into trying to sort of bring me on board. That said, my stories have been mentioned in some of these clues, these Q clues, and then there's usually a pretty strong backlash after that.
Right. And like when we say backlash, what do we mean?
I was talking about mostly just angry emails and people on Twitter. Nothing in real life, fortunately.
So, Margaret Sullivan, I mean, I hate to do this because A, it's a hypothetical, and B, it's a grim hypothetical. But I do think that it's probably worth mentally gaming this out a little bit. I mean, imagine that something happens, an act of violence that results in serious harm or death to one or more journalists. And it's really, really pretty obviously traceable to, it is the work of people who are unmistakably influenced by the rhetoric of the president. That's not exactly a constitutional crisis, but it's not exactly not a constitutional crisis either. What you've got here now is a president who is contributing to an abridgment of the freedom of the press. I don't know what happens. Have you thought about what happens then?
Well, I haven't really played it out. I think it is, your description of the kindling and the gasoline-soaked rags is just about right. It took President Trump a little while to condemn, and again, we don't want to directly connect him to the Annapolis newspaper shooting, which was so terrible. There was no direct connection there. It took him a little bit to condemn that. I don't know that, I don't see Trump ever taking responsibility for bad things that happen because he was involved in them, whether it's Trump University or a bankruptcy of a casino. I mean, it just sort of isn't in his DNA to say, oh, wow, messed that up, that was really bad, and that needs reform, and let's not ever let that happen again. That's just not the techniques that he was taught at the knee of Roy Cohn, So I don't know exactly what would happen, but I don't think there would be a great deal of taking responsibility.
So, we've talked about this in the past, but there's kind of two schools of thought about what the press does in a situation like this. One school of thought is no matter how bad it gets, you just do your job. You just do your job, and you understand that there are places in the world, one of them, of course, is Russia, where it really already is incredibly perilous to be a journalist, that journalists lose their freedom, lose their lives. There are plenty of other places we could name where it's like that. So it's better anyway, no matter how bad it is, here in the United States, do your job and don't make a talking point out of how abused you're feeling by the president. That's sort of one school of thought, and I think it's a school of thought that you and I have both dwelled in at certain times. On the other hand, as the temperature gets turned up on all this, you start wondering, well, maybe it is important to just sort of point this out, how dangerous things are getting. So now you've got Jim Acosta asking Sarah Sanders to say something about this. How useful do you think that is?
Well, that I don't think is very useful because I think, she's not going to say anything that he's asking her to say, and he probably knows that. And so, I don't know that there's a lot of good that's going to come from there. I mean, I'm always quoting my boss, Marty Barron, who says, we're not at war, we're at work. And I think that overall is the best way to be thinking about this. But at the same time, I think if the press itself doesn't stand up for freedom of the press and for pointing out when it's imperiled, I don't know who's going to. So I think we have to kind of do both. We have to do our work and not sort of let our emotions take over. And at the same time, we do need to be showing people and telling people that this is going on because it really matters, not because of us personally, but because of the importance of journalism and the press to American society. And, as a pillar of the democracy, if it's threatened, the whole thing is threatened.
Will, when you describe some of your interactions with QAnon people and even just the layout of the QAnon conspiracy, there's an element of it for an awful lot of these people. It's probably kind of fun. They don't have that much else to do, and here they are, part of knowing about. I'll put quotes around knowing, I guess, knowing about this thing that other people don't know about, which has dire implications, and they just picked up another breadcrumb, so they know one more thing. And we all know. I mean, I don't know. When I was 16, people thought Paul McCartney was dead, and it was really fun. Just sort of collecting all these clues about it. And there's a way also in which the stuff that happens at the rallies. I mean, I'd heard, I think it was on the media this week, in a description of what happened when the CNN camera went off. A whole lot of the people in the Q T-shirts who'd been giving Jim Acosta the finger went over and they started talking to Jim Acosta and saying, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? You know, that in some ways people are kind of enjoying a kind of role playing. I mean, all it takes is one person to take this a lot more seriously than they are before you get, blood being spilled. But maybe you could say a little bit about this. I mean, as you said, some of the people who've approached you online have been rather courteous.
Absolutely. I mean, I think for the vast majority of these people, this is sort of like almost like watching a sport or something. Vice did an interview with some QAnon believers, and they said, when something happens in the world, we just giggle and we say, oh, Q told us about this. We knew about this. We knew this was going to happen. So I do think for most people it is indeed just sort of like a fun thing. And certainly if you're a Trump supporter, I think there was so much buildup in the campaign and so much energy, and this idea that, they were going to get everything they wanted. Hillary Clinton was going to be thrown in prison, all this stuff. And then, Trump gets in office and he has to deal with the boring business of governing. And it's just not as fun to follow that and follow gridlock in Congress as it is to believe that Trump is this almost like a messianic figure who's battling all these evil cults.
Right. And so, Margaret, Will makes a great point, and I think it connects well to another theme that we were exploring here. So there's, people who are Trump followers, one way or another, they have to deal with a certain amount of cognitive dissonance. Many of the things that they were promised in the campaign haven't happened and don't look like they're going to happen. There are things happening that I think are troubling to the sensibilities of almost anybody. I mean, the border family separations are, hard to swallow for people. There are lots of other instances of that. And one of the ways out of that dissonance that President Trump has offered people is simply to, don't believe what you read in the media. Very little of it is true. They're out to get us. In fact, we can hear a little bit of this is the Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania rally. Here's a little bit of President Trump.
So they said I was late when I was actually early, number one. Number two, I guess the meeting was scheduled for 15 minutes, and it lasted for almost an hour. The president overstayed. So I was late and I overstayed, and honestly, folks, it was such a beautiful, beautiful visit and afternoon. But they can make anything bad because they are the fake, disgusting news. All right, let's get back to some boring subjects like Bob Casey.
All right. Margaret, I should say that he's talking about his visit with the Queen, not with Vladimir Putin. It's hard to tell sometimes. But that's very much a technique, right? That if you don't like some of the things that are going to be said, things that have been said, if you're worried, if you're the president and you're worried about what's going to happen when a Mueller report comes out or more indictments come out, or if you're a Trump supporter and you're worried about how to think about all those things, well, what he's essentially done is discredit the means by which you would learn about those things.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that especially with the Mueller investigation, coming, I guess, fairly close to its conclusion, and some very troubling things, apparently, in the future there, probably, it's always hard to tell with Trump, how much of it is sort of gut instinct and how much of it is a plan or a strategy on his part. But I think the result of it is to sort of undermine both the messenger, the press, and the so-called deep state, the Mueller people, who are, again, both of these groups of people out to get the president. And so if he can sort of posit it that way, then whatever news comes out, whatever Mueller finds, whatever the press reports about what he finds, can be diminished or undermined to some extent. And so I think that that's a big part of what's going on here. And the other part of it is simply that he really needs an enemy. And without an immediate political enemy, the press is the next best thing.
Will Sommer, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all these attacks on the press are a way, as Margaret mentioned, to sort of prepare his followers to not believe what happens with Mueller or any other scandals in his administration. This is kind of the culmination of decades of attacks from conservatives on independent sources of truth, whether that be the press or academia or science, stuff like that. And so, Trump's kind of preparing people in the same way that really QAnon prepares people to accept bad news for Trump.
Will, there's one more thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is a question of born out of genuine ignorance on my part, because I just haven't decoded all the cuneiform tablets that constitute QAnon conspiracy theory. But I sort of get the feeling that one of the things that's supposed to happen in that narrative is that certain Republicans, maybe the kind of Republican that isn't completely loyal to President Trump, that politically they get picked off or eliminated, that they get voted out of office. Do I have that right?
Yes, exactly. So part of QAnon is this idea that both Republicans and Democrats were corrupt, and now Trump is kind of this redeeming force that comes into the Republican Party. But for example, John McCain is a big villain in QAnon world.
Right, and so I mean, to me, Margaret Sullivan, it seems as though, one of the things that we look to down the road, whether it happens in the next 6 months or the next year, there are going to be some moments, some tests of nerve politically. I mean, once again, imagine a situation where President Trump, as he has been hinting at for a very long time, starts doing something about Jeff Sessions, starts doing something about Rod Rosenstein, starts doing something about Robert Mueller. It's going to call for some action, not on the part of Democrats alone, but on the part of Republicans. It's very convenient right now to have what Will just described, a conspiracy theory that indicts Republicans who don't support Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I think this is why so many people on both sides of the aisle are putting such emphasis on the midterm elections, because nothing can happen with Congress sort of configured the way it is. If that changes, then the balance of power changes, and it's extremely consequential. So, that's a dynamic that's sort of underlying this whole thing.
All right. Margaret Sullivan, media columnist for the Washington Post and one of the leading lights and voices taking us along these dark paths these days. Great to make the acquaintance of Will Sommer, tech and internet reporter at the Daily Beast, one of the people really learning a lot about QAnon. Also has a newsletter about conservative media, Right Richter. All right. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. I'm going to talk to you. Our phone number is 860-275-7266. I want to talk a little bit more about what happens as a result of the kind of hostility that exists, the unprecedented kind of hostility that exists between President Trump and the press, the emotions that he's ginning up, and where that leads us. 860-275-7266.
You are fake news. The New York Times. You are fake news. CBS, NBC, ABC,
BBC, LA Times.
You are fake news.
The Washington Post.
You are fake news. CNN. Very fake news.
Politico, AP,
HuffPo, BuzzFeed.
Failing pile of garbage. And I've been hearing more and more about a thing called fake news.
fake news.
I've seen people destroyed. And I think it's very unfair.
So we're all done with guests. The remaining time is devoted to a conversation between you and me. A phone call is fine, 860-275-7266. I want to start with this whole question of the president and the press and what's happening here. 860-275-7266. Because I know that A, this is A, hypothetical. It's a thing that hasn't happened yet, and B, it's kind of grim. But it's hard to look at that can of gas and oily rags and lighter and kindling and not think that there's a fire coming. And when the fire comes, in some ways you would think, given America's historic commitment dating back to the Constitution, historic commitment to a free press, that if something happens to members of the press, that is clearly brought about, at least in part and maybe in large part, by the rhetoric of a sitting president, it really ought to be the end of him. It ought to be cause for him to step down. But that's not going to happen. I think we all know that that's not going to happen. I don't think the forces exist that can be brought to bear on President Trump. If 10 people that he respects went in and said, look, you caused this. There's blood on your hands. You, unlike any president in the history of this republic, have created conditions under which reporters have been attacked and killed. You have to leave just because of that. He'd say no, right? I mean, and there are plenty of people who think he would be correct to say no. But it does raise that question, like, how do we live through that particular crisis? I think we're headed for other kinds of crises as well. But this is one that it just seems like it's getting so close. I mean, I hate to say that because this is my profession. Once again, our phone number 860-275-7266. Let me just say another thing, and maybe this will help because I understand also there's some people who are going to say, you guys are just whining because you can't take it, and you dish it out, but you can't take it. I've been a journalist since 1976, and for 16 years, from 1992 to 2008, I was the House liberal at a very, very conservative, otherwise conservative talk station. So you can imagine what my status was like there. I was the guy who believed what most of the listeners to the station did not believe. And I got, for 16 years, like every possible thing happened. And it was often suggested to me that, that I might be in danger. And I kind of accepted that, too. I mean, like people would leave stuff on my car, and I would think, how do they know that's my car? That's not good. They know it's my car. But here's the other thing that I always thought about that. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And if it's going to happen to me, it's going to happen to me. And the reason it's going to be happening to me is that I am a liberal voice on a conservative talk station in a conservative medium. Commercial talk radio is this intensely conservative medium. And so there you go. These things exist. There's really almost nothing I could do. I could hire a bodyguard. Something, I suppose, but I couldn't afford a bodyguard. There's nothing you can do. You just have to accept that. And I did, and most of the time, and I mostly also felt like it wasn't going to happen. Maybe that's how I got through the day. But I also, I knew some of the kookiest listeners. I'd met them in person. and you sort of take the measure of somebody and you think, well, I don't think he's going to shoot me. I had a partner for a while on the air for quite a few years, and we always had kind of a list of who was the most likely. If anybody was going to do it, it was going to be so-and-so. But that kind of went with the territory, and at least I would tell myself if it was going to happen to anybody, it would happen to me because I had said these things. I think what's different now is it could happen to anybody, and it could happen to somebody just doing the job of reporting the news in a regular way. Not like Alan Berg, for example, was this very controversial talk show host who was killed by a listener. But he was very controversial. I think what makes this different right now is you don't have to be there's nothing controversial about Katie Tur, and she didn't do a controversial job of covering the Trump campaign, and she hasn't done a controversial job of covering Trump. She's just a beat reporter. Acosta's just a beat reporter. Maybe they ask hard questions. This administration, as we now know, will also pull you out of White House briefings for asking a question that the president doesn't like or in a way that the president doesn't like. But what's nerve-wracking for me right now is that anybody doing his or her job, just doing a job of reporting facts, is in danger right now. That's how I feel anyway. And that does bother me, and I think it's a sharp turn, too. And it's a turn we don't want to take. All right, 860-275-7266 is the number to call. I'll start with Naim. Naim, I want to say your name correctly. How do you say your name? Naim, all right. You're on the air.
I simply wanted to give a comment, and that's with regard to our 46 on Pennsylvania Avenue. Mm-hmm. Is that I think that he's doing an illustrious job of smoke and mirrors, mm-hmm. and it does precisely what it is intended to do. It is to fool the liberals on the left and to spawn support for the extreme right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your call. Let me go over to I don't want to respond to every single call because then people won't get on the air. Here's Sarah in Deep River. Hi, Sarah. You're on the air.
Hi, Colin. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I just wanted to say that I really don't think we should make light of people who are believing these conspiracy theories and say fake news, because I actually grew up in a cult in Connecticut. It made the news recently, and when we were in the cult, we said fake news too, and I don't think that you can reach people with facts. I think that we're in a very dangerous place right now where politicians are encouraging brainwashing and encouraging people that will not question what they do.
Well, first of all, I now know exactly which cult you're talking about. Congratulations on getting out. It sounds like you're
Thank
fine
you.
now. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It's always first of all, I was a reporter back during that time, and I dealt with like every imaginable group like that. Although that particular one, I don't think I had much contact with, but plenty of like Divine Light Mission, that's the Guru Maharaji, or Scientology, or Unification Church, or I mean, all of them. I had plenty of contact with them. And the truth is, most people are not harmful people. In all of these scenarios, it's the case that it just takes one, right? It takes one person to go out and print out a 3D plastic gun now, It takes the one person who took it a little bit more seriously. So my guess is that QAnon is full of, retired people who, hang around in the McDonald's, surfing the web, and they're probably not all that harmful. But I think as you're suggesting, Sarah,
my comment wasn't meant to imply that people are capable of violence at any moment. My comment was that it's dangerous for our democracy that people are so away from factual thinking.
Right. Well, no, and we talked about this last week on a show about gaslighting. That and what happens here is that you're undermining the pillars that people use to get information, test information, process information. If you successfully discredit all those sources, it's pretty easy to gaslight the public. Seems to me maybe what I should do is take a little break here so we have a little time for everybody else. So Eric, Scott, Chris, Ron, I see you up there. I see you. And anybody else who wants to call 860-275-7266. Before we go to the break, I want to say one more thing. Because this has been on my mind all weekend, too. So we've got, as Margaret was saying, a midterm election coming up. And actually here in Connecticut, just to remind you, we have a primary on August 14th, a week from tomorrow. And after that primary, I feel as though I've sort of stayed away from moderating debates or being a panel on debates this particular cycle just for various reasons. I'm almost tempted to be on one as we head towards the general election, because I think now, particularly with candidates for Congress, if you're running for the House or the Senate, the U.S. House or the U.S. Senate, I think it's an important question to ask people. What will you do? What will you do, for example, if the president tries unilaterally to shut down the Mueller investigation before they're done? What if he fires Sessions, fires Rosenstein, and then tries to shut it down on his own? Because that's not a far-fetched scenario anymore. He sets he lays the foundation for that day after day after day with his tweets. What will you do? Can we count on you to do the right thing in one of these crises? Because we're going to have some kind of crisis. I mean, he has done everything in his power to almost normalize the idea that we're going to have a crisis. So I think it's fair to ask candidates after the primary, as we run towards the general, can we count on you? Can we count on you to stand up against President Trump if he, in fact, violates the basic premises for good governance in America, if he tries to amass power that isn't designated to him in the Constitution? Can we count on you? Anyway, let's take a break. We'll talk to some of the callers on the other side.
Fake news. Fake news. You're fake, 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 fake news. Very fake
news. So if Kurt Schilling has 9 pairs of socks and one sock gets bloody, he has 17 socks. There it is again. Proof that Kellyanne Conway is a space alien. Today's show is produced by Betsy Kaplan, with help from me, Kyone Wolf. Amanda Fish was part of a fish sex slave cult overseen by Calvin Coolidge. Our intern is Zandra Ellen. The part of Bill Curry was played by John Podesta, who controls Minecraft. Coming up this week, a granular discussion of sand and a show about what constitutes a disability. And now, back to Colin and 16 other people.
That's right, that's 17 again, 17. I'm sorry if you're from QAnon. Don, we're just trying to get you worked up. QAnon people get very excited about the number 17 because that's Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. So anytime they hear 17, and there was another one. There was a Trump tweet where he said something about 17 angry Democrats who are going after me. It's like he knows. It's like he's doing it deliberately, holding up those football jerseys with the number 17 on them. What's going on here? The answer is nothing is going on. I just want to make that clear. I mean, at least nothing's going on in that particular way. It's just one of the things that we've learned really since 1963, if you get right down to it, is that if you have enough data, some portion of that data will begin sorting itself into patterns, into narrative patterns. Now, that doesn't mean, and we are also pattern recognizing creatures. It's one of the reasons that our species survived. They were good at noticing patterns. Now, you also have to be good at discerning the difference between false patterns. Every time you eat a blueberry, there's a thunderstorm, and true patterns. But if you have enough information and you have a preconceived idea of what the narrative is, you can start sorting stuff into it. That's what's happening with QAnon. And so, like, every day there's something, right? Because a lot of things happen. Things that I think that's called the law of inevitability in mathematics, that things will happen. Things will just happen all the time. All right, 860-275-7266. Now I sound like a crazy person, but that actually is the law of mathematics. I just want to say that. Here's Eric in Oxford. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
So we're kind of speaking about a fringe group of Trump supporters with QAnon and how that could possibly escalate into violence. I just wanted to comment that there's been some fringe people on the left that have definitely escalated into violence. So I think it's more of like a left and right thing that should be worried about inciting violence.
So who are the people on the left you're talking about?
Well, with the Steve Scalise shooting, I know it's a marginal fringe person, but he's a Bernie Sanders supporter. You had Rand Paul viciously attacked. And
right, but I mean, the Steve Scalise shooting, that wasn't connected to anything. I mean, the rhetoric of Bernie Sanders would be very distinct from the rhetoric of Donald Trump. In other words, Bernie Sanders is not going around saying that these people are disgusting, evil people. You need to do something about them. That's one of the things that separates President Trump from other politicians, that he again and again has driven home the notion that the press is the problem and they are disgusting and they are the enemy of the people. Bernie Sanders didn't go around calling Steve Scalise or Republican congressman the enemy of the people.
Well, it depends how you interpret some of the things people on the left say. The resistance, as far as, you have things like Antifa, not publicly disavowed by a lot of Democrat leaders. So, I do see it just coming from both sides. I'm not saying that, anyone on the left is saying go out and kill people, but it's happening, and these hostilities boil up on both sides.
I would agree, but I would also say there's a false equivalence there. I mean, Antifa is a very, very small movement. Even in Charlottesville, Antifa was vastly outnumbered by the white supremacists who showed up there
well,
in the
at the
first
same
place.
time, I mean, if you look at what just happened with Candace Owen and Charlie Kirk, they're out having breakfast. They get surrounded to the point where, they need police to make a protective border around them. This happened yesterday.
Right,
I mean,
and that kind of thing
so
is indefensible. I agree, but I don't think it's part of quite part of the kind of systematic thing, and it's not coming from the top. That's the difference. President Trump is the president of the United States, the most powerful man in the country, and he has made it his personal crusade, starting in 2015, to gin up antagonism, hostility towards the press, to egg on people who already hate the press, and that's what makes him dangerous in a way that you can't find a Democratic analog to that. There isn't a Democratic politician doing anything that remotely resembles that, and that's, Eric, where I would say false equivalence. I'm not saying that liberal people never do anything bad or leftist people never do anything bad. Of course they do. But here
so
you
you're
have
saying Trump pointing out, the fact that, the media is very biased in my opinion, but I don't see him saying go attack the media. He's just saying, the media, they're biased towards me, which is true. I mean, in my opinion, anyway. He's not saying go kill reporters.
It's not just that they're biased. I mean, first of all, having covered a Trump rally, I can tell you that at a certain point in the rally, he turns to where the press is all penned up. They have us all kind of surrounded in this metal pen. And he goes, and these these are the most disgusting people in the world. That's how that's a way. Not that they're mean to me or they're prejudiced against me or whatever. I mean, that does come up. That comes in there. But he starts with an actual devaluation of them as human beings, and then singles them out. I mean, saying, there's little Katie, look at little Katie.
Yeah,
thousands of people.
This dehumanizing thing is happening on both sides.
There isn't a chief executive. Eric, there just isn't a commander-in-chief doing that on both sides. There's one commander-in-chief, and out of the 45 presidents, he's the only president who's ever done anything like this. And I just really think that, yes, there are offenses committed on each side, but to minimize what's happening right now, this is unprecedented in the history of the United States. A free press is guaranteed in the Constitution. There's a man running the government right now who doesn't want there to be a free press, doesn't want you to believe things that are said by the free press, is in it to discredit what they say. And when that doesn't work, he's also eager to gin up and inflame the hostilities of crowds. And these reporters who've tried to cover this guy have endured stuff thrown at them. They've been spat at online. They've been attacked in sexual ways and anti-Semitic ways. This has never happened before. I mean, we're in a new chapter of the American story. And so, yeah, I understand there's some other stuff on the other side. It's not the same. You'll never persuade me. It's the same. All right. So where am I supposed to go next? Our number, we don't have time to take any more calls. Okay, so I'm going to take a wild guess that this is where I'm supposed to go, to Chris in Ellington. Hi, Chris, you're on the air.
Hello, Colin. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
After listening to this, which I totally agree with you, I'm curious, are the people on the Fox media and other Trump supporters, are they getting the same types of threats that the more or less liberal media outlets are getting, which are horrible?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I don't live in Sean Hannity's world. My guess is that he gets his fair share. I don't think, once again, there isn't anybody at the top doing that. In other words, pick somebody, whoever you think it is, Chuck Schumer, or Nancy Pelosi, or Chris Murphy. There's nobody who is directing at Sean Hannity or anybody like him the kind of venom, the kind of whipping up of crowds. So, yeah, I'm sure social media being what it is, I mean, everybody is horrible on social media. People on the left are horrible. People on the right are horrible. I'm sure if Sean Hannity, if there's a way to DM him or send him a nasty email or tweet directly at him, people do that all the time. But it's I think a little bit different than what we're talking about here. All right. So I don't know. What should I do? I should wrap or should I can take okay. I will take a call from Ron. Hi, Ron in Hartford. You're on the air.
Hey, hi. How are you? I'm actually not from Hartford or Bristol. I'm actually from D.C. and actually from the neighborhood of Comet Pizza, and I've been there a lot. My question, actually, my comment has to do with the press catching up, in that there's a couple aspects of this that are just been missing. They've been missing. Donald Trump is a businessman, and businessmen operate by a completely different rule, which is called make me. I mean, you can say, give me my tax, where's your tax returns? Don't you have any self-respect, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, make me.
Right.
And I don't want to get into the Roy Cohn business, because, that's ridiculous.
Ron, first of all, we're just about to run out of time, so I'm going to stop you there. But I think it's a really important point, and it goes to what I was saying with Margaret earlier. If this day comes, let's hope it doesn't come. Let's hope nothing really bad happens as a result of the kind of whipping up of crowds and whipping up of the base against journalists. But if that day comes, a day that should be the undoing of most conventional politicians, it won't be the undoing. It won't be the voluntary undoing of Donald Trump, because Ron is absolutely right. Donald Trump will say, make me step down over this. Make me even change my tune. If 5 journalists get murdered in their newsroom tomorrow by somebody who is paying close attention to the rhetoric of Donald Trump about the press, I would imagine that Donald Trump will dismiss this, will go on, and I doubt he will change his tune. I doubt it will even cause him to self-correct. Anyway, thanks for being here and being part of the phone calls. I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody, but we got to go. Thanks to everybody who helped.
Captain, the aliens have disappeared, and so has the shuttle.
Scan the sector.
I have, sir.
Well, I suppose that is the end of Q.